Yeah, my name is Jan Cisek, and we have David Furlong going to talk about his research. So let's start with by you stating the title of your research and kind of offering a brief overview of its core focus.
Okay, well, my research project is titled A Mixed Method Phenomenological, it's a long word, study into hypnotic regression therapy. And the particular research question is, what impact does hypnotic regression therapy, HRT, through the inducement of altered states of consciousness have on an individual's sense of wholeness and well-being? And how can this be understood against the background of whether consciousness emerged from physicality or particles emerged from consciousness? And the background to it is basically comes out of my research into my master's, which was into altered states of consciousness within therapeutic practice. And in that research, I interviewed 12 individuals, 6 of whom had had a regression experience using HRT. And out of that experience, most of them had had a transformative experience. So it had one session which had actually transformed their life. And when I went to do some look at what research was there behind regression therapy, I found that there was practically no good research carried out since the late 1980s. So we've got more than 30 years where there's been very little research into regression therapy, and yet from the evidence of these individuals that I interviewed, they had it had been a transformative experience from their perspective.
Right. So you know, when sometimes they ask you to present it in literally in 1 minute or one sentence, what is the essence of your research and what kind of key main questions or problems you want to address?
Well, I'm looking at to as I said, to explore the experience from individuals, and the 2 ways of doing this is one through a qualitative study. And the qualitative part involved interviewing 15 individuals who had a regression session. These interviews lasted about approximately an hour on average, and the interviews sought to elicit what was the essence of their experience, what impact it had upon them, how easy it was for them to go into a regression session. And one of the challenging aspects of this type of approach or this area is that with regression, it can sometimes bring up experiences of a perceived past life. So it was understanding something about how that sense of past lives had an impact on their current life, effectively.
Right. Okay. So, so there's a bit of background about yourself for people who don't know you. How did you get into this kind of research topic? It was just because you discovered that there was not much about it, or you've got other personal, academic, or other kind of motives, you know, for this?
I've been, my background in it is, I've been a therapist for the best part of 50 years. And in part of my research, I have started to work with regression therapy in starting to in helping clients begin to access into their inner world. The essence of it all is that simply talking about things in talking therapies often doesn't really get into a deeper level. And the idea of regression is, if someone comes to you with a specific presenting problem, by inducing a sort of altered state of consciousness, getting them to relax, in a way sort of let go so much of the connection to the rational mind, is to begin to delve into the subconscious part of the self, to begin to see what the subconscious mind brings forward. And the subconscious mind would appear to hold an enormous store of information and knowledge, which can be then used to help clear sometimes blockages. So you can pick up childhood traumas, you can pick up other levels of traumas, and sometimes indeed in my practice, clients will go back and pick up traumas which have come from what they perceive to be past lives.
Right. So you already mentioned that there hasn't been much research into this area, but any other gaps in research you've identified for this topic?
Well, it's simply that there's just been a complete paucity of research. So if there was been quite a lot of research into certain areas, then I could say, where's a particular gap. But the lack of the research is evident, and I think I can understand the reasons for this, because unfortunately regression therapy got a bad press in the 1990s with what was called false memory syndrome, and so of course it was very easy then from materialistic perspective, and this is what this study challenges, is that this is simply made up stories that go on within the psyche, that they don't have any real meaning, and therefore the whole idea of this therapeutic approach should be dismissed. That's despite the fact that hypnotherapy has been an accepted part of the British Medical Association form of treatment since the 1950s. So it has been accepted. Hypnotherapy as such has been accepted. But this particular aspect of hypnotherapy has not been accepted, because effectively it challenges the materialistic paradigm. And that's part of the third part of my study. The qualitative part I've mentioned. There is a quantitative part which again looks to evaluate the experience through a questionnaire format, looking specifically at the experience of the practitioner and the client through the same process, the same therapeutic experience. So the questionnaire is trying to adjust that experience from those two perspectives, that of the client and that of the therapist. And then the third part is trying to understand all of this in the context of this larger background picture, which, as I was trying to highlight, as to whether consciousness effectively has emerged from physicality, which is what the current materialistic paradigm seems to suggest, or whether indeed there is evidence to suggest that consciousness or physicality has emerged from consciousness. In other words, consciousness stands before the physicality. And this is significant because one way to better understand regression therapy, the experiences of regression therapy, is to see that there is a thread of consciousness which extends beyond the current lifetime.
Yes, so thank you, because you started talking about my next question, but let's go back a bit to the methodology and design. Obviously, it's quite new, but is there anything distinctive or innovative that you're bringing to this research?
In the quantitative part, what I am seeking to do, and this is one of the ways of trying to understand the best methods of exploring the therapeutic relationship, and obviously that there is a sort of gold standard which they talk about of having sort of double-blind studies and so forth. But when you're dealing with something like regression therapy, you can't approach it from that perspective. It has to be a sort of evaluation that primarily that comes from the client's perspective, the client's experience. But what I have thought to do, and it's picking up a little bit on some other suggestions of how some therapeutic studies have been carried out, is the way you get both the practitioner and the client to present their experience of the similar therapeutic experience. So, I mean, this is a process which could be applied to a number of different types of treatment, but I haven't found it being regularly applied. But I think as we start to go forward now and begin to recognize that the certain areas where you can't do the sort of double-blind studies, all you can look at is the actual client's perspective as being the most significant, that this sort of approach could be proved valuable.
Yeah, obviously, you know, that's going to be useful for future research. But just quickly, on a personal level, as a researcher and academic researcher, how was the whole process of kind of going through the design methodology? Was there a lot of going back and forth, or from initial kind of conception, you had a clear idea of how to do it?
Yeah, well, I've had a clear idea. I managed to put it together. I mean, it was challenged by various of my supervisors initially, so I had to go back, and then that led to certain changes. But ultimately, it has gone through the ethics committee. So I am taking it forward on that basis. It is there was no precise set format, so I haven't lifted a sort of preset questionnaire which has been tried and tested. So this is where it's slightly innovative, but I think it's just opening up to this level of approach, and particularly because I'm dealing with a therapy which sits outside of what would be regarded as a normal type of therapeutic intervention. So yes, it is innovative in that sense, but there could be other therapeutic modalities, such as things like spiritual healing and things of that nature, where it could be valuable to start to evaluate the same therapeutic experience from two perspectives.
Right. So let's go back to the broader kind of context, you know, the sort of theoretical, the philosophical kind of concerns that you had. And you already mentioned, you know, the kind of your idea of primacy, not only your idea, but other people's idea of primacy of consciousness over matter. Can you sort of elaborate a bit more about the nuances and what actually you want to achieve? And what sort of contribution do you think your research can make to the existing knowledge?
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons why the hypnotic regression therapy has been disparaged so greatly, and if you read there are some studies, particularly prior to the 1990s or the year 2000, and one or two others which suggest that this is a completely false approach, because from a perspective of materialism, there's absolutely no evidence to support the idea that consciousness could continue beyond the physical body, and therefore, per se, this whole approach must be fallible. It must be void. It has no standing. So this, of course, obviously challenges my own practical experience in this field, because when I'm working with clients, I know that they get a lot of value from it, and I know from the feedback I get that they get value. Clients have to pay to come and see me, and therefore they're not going to spend money on an area which they feel is not going to be helpful to them. And I have quite a number of clients who I have on a regular basis, so that they must consider and perceive that this is a valuable approach.
How long have you been doing this practice so far?
In this level since 2000. So over the past 25 years, really.
You've got a lot of experience in that. Yeah.
So I have a lot of experience in relationship to that. So the fundamental question is I always took on board that the scientific paradigm, the materialistic paradigm, was based upon substantiated fact, and that was the reason why it held so much credibility. But in beginning to really look into it and explore the essence of what sits behind materialism, what I came to realize, of course, it's based upon an assumption. It is based upon an assumption which is derived from the fact that they consider the primary pattern of the way the universe has developed was first of all from the Big Bang, and then ultimately somewhere along the line our solar system was formed and a little planet called Earth came into being, and then eventually on Earth life emerged, and after quite a long period of time it got to a point where human beings emerged on the planet, and of course we would regard human beings as conscious, and therefore consciousness is a relatively late development in relationship to the universe. And certainly the way in which consciousness in that level is perceived and understood, it has to sit firmly within our brain, and therefore our experiences are all contained within our brain. Now, that is based on an assumption. There's no absolute evidence to prove that to be correct, because there isn't an alternative viewpoint which comes under the broad heading of, I guess you would call, idealism, which suggests, in fact, that what came first was consciousness, and that physicality emerged out of consciousness. And so from that perspective, we live in a field of consciousness. And if we live in a field of consciousness, it begins to explain, it can explain a lot of anomalous experiences. One of the ways to challenge any form of theory is to see whether it can be falsified and what was needed to falsify it. And in relationship to the materialistic paradigm, as far as we know from science and as far as we know from quantum mechanics, all of this area, there's no simple way that you can explain something like telepathy. So if someone carries out telepathic experiences and shows that telepathy exists, then this starts to falsify the materialistic paradigm. Unfortunately, it's very easy for a materialist to then say, oh, well, this can't be true. So the evidence you have got from the telepathic experiences or studies that have been carried out, and there have been loads of them over the period of time, and a whole raft of other anomalous things, per se cannot be true because there's no evidence in science to support it. And so, that's one of the challenges, really, when you're dealing with a belief. What it comes down to is a belief and a mindset which affirms emphatically, excuse me, that consciousness has to be limited to what's going on inside our brains. But the alternative view, that we're living in a field of consciousness, in fields of consciousness, if you like, opens up to the possibility that we could view our brain a little bit more like a television set, that the consciousness is a wave of energy or fields of energy, and there are different fields of energy that can link up individuals and people, and therefore you can provide an explanation for these sorts of experiences, and there's a lot of others. And going the other way to try to falsify things like idealism, the way to falsify that is to show that there's no evidence of connection, that in fact consciousness is solely held within the brain, and if that's was the case, then things like past lives and all of those sorts of things, and synchronous experiences, telepathy, spiritual healing, a whole raft of psychic phenomena cannot be true and would be simply down to coincidence. And so you would have to weigh up these two basic amounts of evidence. And I think when we start to delve into it in some depth, the evidence seemed to support more the idealistic perspective than it does the materialistic perspective. So I think we're at a point of a sort of paradigm shift, really. It's not to say that the primacy of consciousness is better than physicality. We're living in physical bodies, and therefore physical bodies are hugely important. So I wouldn't want to in any way deny any of that, except that just to affirm there is this other dimension which we should be taking note of and beginning to accept and to see it, even if we just take the view that these are both theories. They're both theories which have equal weight and should be open to being accepted as ways of explaining experience, rather than simply taking a viewpoint that the sort of idealistic one is completely false per se because it doesn't fit into the materialistic perspective.
Yes. Right. So any sort of going back to kind of maybe initial findings, have you found anything unexpected or surprising so far, or kind of it confirms your initial sort of assumptions?
Well, so far, the 15 qualitative interviews which were carried out, for the most part, actually certainly confirmed that these 15 individuals gained valuable insight from their regression experience. It helped provide a way of them perceiving what was going on for them. They valued the experience. Now, to what degree some of them absolutely accepted that this was an experience of a past life is also, some of them had more nuanced perspective about it all, which is fine. I'm absolutely happy with that. There was no one that I interviewed in the 15, and I guess there was good reasons for that, who said, no, there's a load of rubbish. I wasn't able to experience anything. So they were all individuals who had a session and gained some valuable insight from it. From the quantitative survey, of course, this is opening up to a sort of wider perspective, and it offers the opportunity for people to express something about their experience of a regression session where they might not have had some valuable insight or help from it. There have been a number of those cases. So I think what we have to say clearly is not everyone who has a regression session is immediately going to show some benefit from it. It may be there's different reasons why they don't get any form of clarity. Maybe there's some things that are going on within them, and there may be some reluctance to want to delve into parts of themselves, and maybe this is an area that needs further research. So I'm very open to the fact that hypnotic regression therapy is not necessarily a catch-all therapy that's going to benefit everyone, and that I recommend everyone to have it. But broadly speaking, the research has been positive, broadly, to quite a high degree. I mean, I've not analysed them all as yet to any great depth, but certainly I would say of the 15 cases which we had, certainly 12 of them had very positive experiences coming out of the regression. On the quantitative study, again, it's certainly more than 50% have found it being very beneficial. But again, I've not fully yet analysed all of that data, so it's all information waiting to be assessed as yet. But I've got quite a lot of information now on it, and certainly to the extent that regression therapy should at least be considered as a potentially valuable therapy for some individuals.
So you already kind of generally mentioned how you're doing this research, but any specific or kind of individual conceptual or maybe analytical tools that have been very useful in interpreting your work?
No, not at this stage, in the sense of specific types of tools to to analyze it. I'm not yet in the detailed analysis stage. I've gone through and done a broad analysis of the qualitative study, but again, it needs to be gone through and refined in more detail that I've yet actually carried out. The quantitative study is still in the process of being collated and collected, and the third part of the study is also in the process of being really considered and looked at. So it's a journey which I'm hoping to be able to begin to put all of these threads together over the next 9 months or so. So that's part of my intent. Is at this stage has been gathering a lot of data, exploring different facets of it all, and in that process I've also written a few articles as well, just begin to highlight something in the areas of this research. But I still can't yet be definitive and provide exact, quantitative results coming back from it.
So you already start talking about the kind of future directions, but let's kind of go into future. And once you complete your research, are you going to do anything else, or any kind of emerging questions or areas you hope to explore further within the study as well?
I think the reason for the study is to really try to bring a way forward of looking at the value of considering a different ontological perspective on the nature of who and what we are. I certainly know from my own experience working directly with clients that I'm using different perspectives in relationship to how I view the self, the psychology of the inner world, and some of this is links in with some other studies. So, for example, the whole idea that we hold within us sort of subpersonality characters, and that these characters can carry wounded aspects of self, but seem to have their own sense of individuated awareness. And there have been 1 or 2 studies in relationship to that, particularly sort of links in with all of the work carried out by Richard Schwartz in his internal family systems therapy. So it's combining that, but it's looking at the nature of the inner core self. He talks about the self, or the core self, and to see this core self as having a component which is also transcendent, that it's not just held within the lifetime of the current body, but to begin to open up to a broader perspective and to begin to understand really that people can have anomalous experiences, and that these can perhaps be understood in a broader context of a non-materialistic paradigm. So it's seeing how all of that goes forward, and particularly really in relationship to my own studies, my own work in linking up with other organizations which are looking to try to bring forward a sort of new paradigm shift in relationship to supporting evidence to do with these fields. And in that context, it's just seeing how all of that can get taken forward in a new way. So I'm sort of quite excited at the moment. I think there's a lot of interesting things going on. The whole area of transpersonal psychology, which is what this field comes under, I think is very much in its in the youth stages of its awareness. It's beginning to have on ideas, but it sort of needs to I think embrace deeper perspectives on who and what we are, nature of who and what we are. So yeah, seeing how all of that goes forward really.
So coming back to the nature of who we are, so let's kind of maybe finish on your kind of personal, transpersonal and professional kind of insights in regard to the research and for your growth. Anything kind of surprised you, or you had any doubts, or any kind of specific insights that kind of stand out so far?
I mean, that's a fascinating question, really, because in some senses, as we go forward, lots of new insights. I mean, the greatest insights I get come out of working with my clients, because we're hitting problems and issues, and some of these problems are to do with, fundamental aspects of consciousness. When I'm talking about regression, I'm predominantly looking about going back to the origin of a problem. But if we begin to expand this out, begin to think there is sitting within each of us an aspect of consciousness which exists beyond the death of the physical body, what one can begin to find is some of those aspects of consciousness, with their own free will, have and can have situations where they sort of become stuck, and they can go on and then attach to individuals. So this starts to get quite complex. If we look at all the studies which have been carried out into the near-death experience, there's a suggestion that on the death of the physical body, some aspect of consciousness, part of consciousness, separates out from the body, can witness and perceive what's going on around the body, and then in the latter stages of a full near-death experience, they have a sense of traveling through a tunnel of light to sometimes meet individuals that they know are deceased, ancestors, and sometimes they meet a being of light before returning back to the physical body. In my experience, and it sort of ties in a little bit again with some of the insights which have come out of internal family systems therapy, is that some of these parts, sometimes you can get parts or aspects of consciousness, whether we call them souls or spirits or whatever term you want to put to them, which can remain attached to the physical and sometimes attached to individuals. And part of my therapeutic work is when you're working at the inner world, sometimes this brings to light some of these entities or spirits which can then need help to being able to clear in order to resolve certain psychological issues. So it starts to get quite complex. What I would say, from my understanding, and this is working absolutely with clients over a long period of time, that I think our primary essence does not exist on the physical plane, but exists in the spiritual plane. And if I call about a plane, you can see it as a field of consciousness. So you could say in the spiritual field of consciousness, our spirits is where they're primarily located. But in order to understand something about physicality, aspects of that consciousness come into the physical world to experience. And in that journey of experience, so they gain in understanding and move back eventually into the spiritual dimension. Now, this opens up the whole question of what's the universe about? Why is the universe here? I was attending a lecture over the weekend where there was an individual, Federico Fagin, who was talking, and one of his views, which correlates fairly closely with my own perception, he talks about the reason of the universe is to, from the perspective of consciousness, is to know itself. I was always taken the perspective that's similar to it, is about the evolution of consciousness. Is, in other words, how does consciousness evolve? How does consciousness grow? How does the awareness grow? And that this creative impulse behind the universe started to establish different facets of itself to explore consciousness. So we're all part of a universal program, I suppose, in that sense, that is in a journey of exploring consciousness from different perspectives.
Very interesting. So can I interrupt you? So, but obviously we talk about the materialistic point of view, starting with matter, Big Bang, and so on. So, and you saying another saying that, you know, the consciousness was first. But Was it from the beginning existed as such, or was it created, or there was a beginning to consciousness? Because when you're saying about the evolution of consciousness, we kind of implies that we can become more conscious, if you like.
Well, yes. I mean, in that sense, I would say at the very least, consciousness as a fundamental had to be at the very beginning there at the Big Bang. And indeed, the Big Bang could have come out of consciousness. But, these are things which we can't really at this stage understand or determine. Except that in my experience, there are levels of consciousness, levels of awareness which seems to exist that we can begin to tap into and become aware of, which are non-embodied. And indeed, one of the questions I put to Federico for Jean was his perspective of consciousness. Could consciousness exist without being embodied? From his perspective, absolutely yes. So he was seeing it, and many other sort of researchers or individuals like him would suggest that it's true. From psychic experiences. From a materialistic perspective, of course, it's nonsense. They would have no perspective to think that consciousness was there at the beginning of the universe, even though there seems to be some amazing principles that run through the universe. I mean, all the studies into quantum mechanics and the studies into mathematics and all of these areas sort of indicate a sort of profound understanding of how things sort of fit together, certain principles. But also, I mean, one of the areas of inquiry that I studied, and I think picking up what's been surprising, I think one of the biggest surprises, although from my point of view, these are things which have been part of my belief system, was how fallible and how insecure that the materialistic paradigm is when it's based on one thing. And when I was looking at your studies into quantum mechanics, and particularly in relationship to the double slit experiment, the sort of paradox between the wave particle state of light and electrons and so forth, and from a scientific perspective, how it becomes impossible to predict when an electron or a wave an electron is fired through the double slit as to where that electron will end up on the detection plate, and how, in a way, scientists eventually took the decision that because we can't measure this, because we can't predict this, we're therefore going to choose to ignore it. And we're going to focus only on that which we can measure. So, there's just amazing areas within, the universe, which, if we could begin to open up and begin to consider, and the idea, if you like, they've now begun to show that it is possible to entangle things, that particles can get entangled, and the idea that maybe consciousnesses can become entangled. And I've had just experiences, even recently, where similar ideas have come up with people I've been in discussion with, quite spontaneously. And certainly
there's been quite a few sort of anecdotal stories that people came up with literally the same story or the same song. So obviously could be coincidental, but you have to look at that as well.
Yes, indeed. And I mean, at this conference, one of the areas which I have studied and had quite a lot of experience with is a whole sense of the consciousness which sits within trees. And I have had a whole sense that trees are very conscious, that they can actually communicate with me. So I've had discussions with trees. And in those discussions with trees, when this first occurred back in the 1990s, I was just amazed at what I was picking up, what the trees seemed to be telling me. It's sort of like telepathic messages going on in my head. And they told me about how they communicated through their roots. They told me a load of other things which in which the trees work. They told me that they have Mr. Trees and Mrs. Trees, which I had never thought about before. And it got to the point where I was really questioning whether the things I was picking up were correct. And then one day I was communicating with an Atlantic cedar tree, and the cedar tree suddenly said, "Oh, by the way, I gave some healing to a friend of yours recently." I thought, wow, that's something I can check up. So the next time I saw this individual, I had said to her that she knew I was interested in sort of the weird and the wonderful, and I said to her that I had a sense of communicating with a tree that had a connection with you, and she immediately said, "I know the tree you mean." She identified the tree. She then explained what had happened to her. She had been in a state of some distress because of the death of an individual who was close to her, and she said, "I spent the best part of a day sat under this tree, sobbing my heart out, and I felt the tree really helped me."
Was it a specific tree, physical
tree? Absolutely.
Physical
a tree.
somewhere she was sitting under. Yeah. Okay.
You look around and think, how many trees are there in your neighborhood?
Well, I can tell you one experience. Well, my name Cisek actually means yew tree, so I'm into trees, and I've been hanging trees for ages. Yes. And particularly, I like ginkgo tree, and I've got lots of. I know all of them actually in my neighborhood, and I can feel it whenever I'm passing. They kind of relax me. I don't know. There's some kind of a relationship I develop with them. Even if I forget, I'm just rushing, I can just feel kind of relaxing effect of the tree on me. So yes. I completely, and a lot of people have similar experience. Yes. Obviously, you've got the grounding effect by touching the tree. They've measured that you can have a grounding effect. So obviously, not only with trees, but any ground. But yes, I can relate to that. A lot of people have that. So it's
but the very fact she identified the tree, and then I have to ask myself, how did the tree know that she was a friend of mine? Right? And how did the tree know that I had that question in my mind in order to answer that specific question? Now, interestingly, from a synchronistic perspective, at this conference I was attending, we had an opportunity. This Federico Fagin was speaking online, so it was a Zoom call, and a number of us had an opportunity to ask specific questions. So we had to stand in a line and wait for our turn to ask the questions. And a number of people had gone before. Federico had been sharing his insights and understanding, and then the person who was in front of me was getting towards the end of his question, or had asked this question, when Federico suddenly said, "Well, one of the areas of research which we're looking to in at the moment is all to do with the consciousness of trees." Because if trees are conscious, can be shown to be conscious, and they don't have a brain, then it begins to absolutely falsify materialism. And then the person that I was in front of me got up, and I sat in the seat. I was able to say to Federico, "Well, that's interesting, because the consciousness of trees is part of the presentation I'm giving to this conference." Mm-hmm. So the synchronicity of that sense, I think, was telling. Mm-hmm. So yes, what I think is the most surprising thing for me out of the study so far is how fallible is the current materialistic paradigm, and it's absolutely has no more validity in a provable sense than has idealism. And indeed, the evidence will begin to suggest that idealism, or the idea that consciousness, that we live in fields of consciousness, has more evidence to support it than the opposite. And there's all sorts of ways that this can be done.
Thank you. So we need to conclude. Any kind of advice to new researchers who might be interested in similar fields? So what would you suggest to them? How to start that, or what to do, what to be prepared for?
Well, if I look at my journey, of the PhD journey so far, there have been challenging parts. I mean, some areas it comes forward about dealing with the ethics committee. Some areas it's to do with dealing with the supervisors and the perspectives on how studies should be carried forward. I think the difficulty is we're at this transition stage where the sort of certain scientific ways of approaching things are considered that they can only be done in a certain way, and I think that's open to challenge now. I think we have to be very open to all sorts of other levels of evaluating experiences, and ultimately it's the experiences which become important. And this is where the whole sort of qualitative research perspective has started to expand. It's not just a question of numbers. Numbers have a part to play. How we measure things have a part to play, for sure. But the life is much greater than just being able to create numbers around things. It's the whole sense of the experience that becomes important, and how we evaluate those experiences. So it's a journey, and it's been an interesting journey from my perspective. I'm still not there, so I still haven't completed all, at least from this study's perspective. So I have to wait to see until, hopefully this time next year, when I'll be able to say, I've concluded this journey, or this part of my journey, or not. Whether I need to go on a bit more, who knows? But
I guess the message is that, with Aleph Trust, it's a nice community of people who can support similar research. And because my understanding is that there are not that many universities. Obviously, it's growing. There are not that many universities that are kind of open to this sort of research yet. Yeah.
Yes, yes, that's true. And I think this is what's exciting, really. I think there are other universities, not only in the UK, are opening up to the possibility. I know of sort of similar studies going on in York and in Warwick University, Exeter, I believe they've done as well. So and of course in America, and I think in Europe there's potential to open up to these areas. And it's a challenge to materialism, really, that I think this is what's taking place, and really try to understand where consciousness sits within us. Is consciousness just held within our brains, or is there fields of consciousness which we are all part of? That our field of consciousness, in fact, expands out beyond us, and as soon as I think of someone, there is a sort of field link which is created. But yes, all interesting, and I've absolutely valued the chance to share with the Aleph Trust group, the cohort of us who are studying the PhD, because we have a particular ethos, perspective, which helps bring a degree of support and help in relationship to what we're doing. So all good.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks, Jan.